The fluorescent lights hummed overhead like dying wasps as Maya Rodriguez stared at the stack of invoices spread across her cramped desk. Each piece of paper told the same story: overcharges, phantom employees, services never rendered. The Millfield Town Hall's basement office smelled of mold and broken dreams, but Maya had grown accustomed to both. Her fingers traced the latest billing statement from Hartwell Construction: $47,000 for road improvements on Elm Street. She'd driven down Elm Street that morning. The potholes were deeper than ever. "Still playing detective, Maya?" The voice belonged to Tom Bradley, the town's procurement officer, whose belly strained against his polo shirt as he descended the narrow stairs. His wedding ring caught the harsh light as he gestured dismissively at her paperwork. "You know, there are easier ways to make enemies." Maya didn't look up. At 34, she had perfected the art of appearing smaller than she was, a survival skill learned from years of being the only Latina in rooms full of white men who spoke in golf metaphors and handshake agreements. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her thrift store blazer bore the faint scent of determination mixed with instant coffee. "I'm not making enemies, Tom. I'm doing my job." She held up another invoice, this one from Pinnacle Security Services, for $23,000 monthly. "When's the last time you saw a Pinnacle guard at the community center?" Tom's laugh was hollow, echoing off the concrete walls. "Maya, honey, you're new here. Some things you just don't understand yet. These companies, they've been working with the town for decades. They know how things work." The word honey hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Maya finally looked up, her brown eyes steady and unblinking. "I understand math, Tom, and I understand that $180,000 a year for invisible security guards is theft." Above them, the old building groaned as late afternoon foot traffic crossed the main floor. The sound reminded Maya of her grandmother's house in East Millfield, how the walls would settle and sigh as evening approached. Abuela Elena had lived in that house for 47 years, watching the neighborhood change around her like seasons, sometimes gentle, sometimes violent. She'd been the one to teach Maya that numbers never lied, even when people did. "Your grandmother would be proud," her best friend Carmen had said just 3 months ago during one of their Tuesday night dinners at Rosita's Cafe. Carmen Vega ran the town's only surviving small market, a cramped space that smelled of fresh cilantro and hope. She was 42 with laugh lines earned through 2 decades of serving a community that bigger chains had abandoned. "Fire changes things, mija. Fire makes people listen." Now, standing in the basement with Tom's condescending grin burning into her vision, Maya felt that fire stirring. She gathered the invoices into a neat stack, each paper a small weapon in an arsenal she was only beginning to understand. "I'm calling a town meeting," she announced. Tom's laugh was sharper this time. "A town meeting, Maya? You're a part-time bookkeeper. You file papers and balance checkbooks. You don't call meetings." "Any citizen can call a town meeting. It's in the town charter, section 4.3. "I've already posted the notices." The color drained from Tom's face. "Maya, listen to me. These contracts, they're complicated. There are relationships involved, handshake deals that go back generations. You start poking around, asking questions, making accusations, you're going to upset people who have long memories and short tempers."
"Good," Maya said, standing to her full height of 5 feet 4 inches. "Maybe it's time some people got upset." Tom's eyes narrowed. "You know what happened to the last person who tried to rock the boat around here?" Maya knew. Everyone knew. Janet Morrison had been the town's previous auditor, a woman in her 50s who'd asked too many questions about a mysterious $200,000 expenditure for infrastructure improvements that seemed to exist only on paper. One morning, she'd simply stopped coming to work. The official story was early retirement. The unofficial story was that her car had been vandalized 3 times in 2 weeks, and her daughter had received a job offer in California that was too good to refuse. Janet Morrison was scared, Maya said quietly. I'm not Janet Morrison. After Tom left, muttering threats disguised as advice, Maya sat alone in the basement office. The building's heating system wheezed to life, pushing stale air through decades-old vents. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for David Chen, the young journalist who'd covered her hiring for the Millfield Gazette. David was 26, fresh out of journalism school, and hungry for stories that mattered. He'd been working at the Gazette for 8 months, mostly covering school board meetings and ribbon cuttings, but Maya had seen something in his questions during her interview, a persistence that reminded her of herself. Maya, what's up? David's voice crackled through the phone. I need to show you something, she said. Can you meet me at the town hall? Bring your camera. 30 minutes later, David arrived with a laptop bag slung over his shoulder and curiosity written across his angular face. His press badge hung from a lanyard that looked too new, too hopeful. Maya led him to the basement office and spread the invoices across her desk like tarot cards predicting municipal disaster. Holy shit, David whispered, then immediately apologized for swearing. Sorry, holy cow, this is huge, Maya. It's bigger than huge, Maya replied. Look at this. She pulled out a manila folder labeled Hartwell Construction and opened it to reveal a pattern of payments spanning 5 years. Every month, like clockwork, sometimes for roads that don't exist, sometimes for buildings that were never built, always for amounts just under the threshold that would require competitive bidding. David's fingers flew across his laptop keyboard as he took notes. Do you have documentation? Photographs? Proof that the work wasn't done? Maya smiled for the first time in days. David, I have everything. I've been documenting this for 2 months. I've taken pictures, checked addresses, driven every street in this town. I know where every pothole is, where every streetlight is broken, where every sidewalk needs repair. And I know which of those problems could have been fixed with the money that's been disappearing into phantom contracts. As she spoke, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced since her teenage years, the electric thrill of righteous anger transformed into purpose. She remembered being 16, watching her mother clean office buildings at night for minimum wage while rich men in suits complained about having to pay for the services she provided. She remembered her mother's hands would crack and bleed from industrial cleaning chemicals, and how she'd still wake up at 5 a.m. to make Maya breakfast before school. There's more, Maya continued, pulling out another folder, Pinnacle Security Services. They're supposed to provide guards for the community center, the library, and 3 municipal buildings. I've spent the last month checking these locations at random times, day shifts, night shifts, weekends. I have photos, timestamps, witness statements. David, there are no guards. There have never been guards. David leaned back in his chair, overwhelmed. Maya, this isn't just corruption. This is organized theft. This is conspiracy. This is how business has always been done in Millfield, Maya finished. And it's about to change.
Outside, the October wind rattled the basement windows, carrying with it the scent of dying leaves and distant chimney smoke. Maya's phone buzzed with a text message from her sister Sophia. Kids asking when Tia Maya is coming to dinner. Can't keep stalling them forever. Sophia lived in the suburbs of Hartford with her husband and 2 daughters in a house with a 2-car garage and a lawn that someone else maintained. She'd escaped Millfield 15 years ago and never looked back. Every conversation between the sisters carried the unspoken question, why are you still there? Maya had never been able to articulate the answer, but sitting in that basement office, surrounded by evidence of systematic theft from her community, she finally understood. She was there because someone had to be. She was there because of what Elena had taught her that running away from problems only meant someone else would have to face them later. David, she said, her voice steady with newfound resolve, I want you to publish everything. Every invoice, every photograph, every detail. But first, I want you to help me with something else. What? Maya reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a manila envelope she'd been carrying for 3 weeks. Inside were the forms to declare candidacy for Millfield Town Council.
She'd filled them out in pencil, erased them, filled them out again in pen, then hidden them away like a secret too dangerous to speak aloud. "I'm going to run for town council," she said, "and I'm going to win." David stared at her for a long moment. "Maya, you realize what you're saying. You're talking about taking on the entire establishment. These contracts you're exposing, the people benefiting from them aren't just going to roll over and let you win." "I know," Maya replied. "That's exactly why I have to try." The basement fell silent except for the steady hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of cars passing on Main Street. Maya looked around the cramped office that had become her battlefield, at the stacks of evidence that had become her weapons, at the young journalist who might become her first ally in a war she was only beginning to understand. But there was something else in that silence, something Maya couldn't yet name. It felt like the moment before a storm, when the air grows heavy and electric, and you know that everything is about to change. She thought about her grandmother's weathered hands, about her mother's midnight shifts, about all the people in Millfield who worked hard and played by the rules while others grew rich from their taxes. "David," she said, "there's one more thing you need to know. The town meeting I called, it's not just about these contracts. It's about something bigger." She walked to a filing cabinet in the corner and pulled out a thick folder labeled Municipal Budget Analysis. Inside were spreadsheets, charts, and projections that told the story of a town slowly being drained dry. These phantom contracts aren't random. They're part of a pattern. Every year the town raises taxes because the budget is tight. Every year we cut services because we can't afford them. The library closes early, the community center cancels programs, the road crew gets laid off. But every year these same companies get their payments. On time, every time, whether they do the work or not. David's eyes widened as he scanned the documents. "How much money are we talking about?" Maya's smile was grim. "Over the last 5 years? Nearly $2 million. $2 million that could have fixed every pothole, funded every community program, kept every municipal employee on payroll. $2 million that instead went to line the pockets of people who have never missed a meal or worried about paying rent." "Jesus," David whispered.
"Now you understand why I have to run," Maya said. "This isn't just about corruption. This is about the future of this town. And if I don't fight for that future, who will?" Maya's alarm clock screamed at 5:30 a.m., the same digital banshee that had dragged her from sleep every weekday for the past 18 months. In the gray pre-dawn light filtering through her apartment's thin curtains, she could see the water stain on the ceiling that her landlord had promised to fix next month for the past 6 months. The brown splotch had grown into the shape of Texas, a geographic reminder that some promises were made to be broken. Her apartment occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian house on Birch Street, where the radiator clanged like an angry ghost, and the floorboards creaked out Morse code messages to the elderly woman who lived below. Mrs. Patterson was 78 and survived on Social Security and the kindness of neighbors who brought her groceries and checked on her during winter storms. She'd lived in Millfield for 50 years and had stories about when the town was different, when Main Street bustled with local shops and young families saved enough money to buy houses with backyards big enough for swing sets. Maya's morning routine was a carefully choreographed dance of efficiency. Shower in exactly 8 minutes while the coffee brewed. Toast with peanut butter eaten standing at the kitchen counter while checking emails on her phone. Hair pulled back, minimal makeup applied with the precision of someone who'd learned to maximize impact with minimal resources. Her work wardrobe consisted of 3 blazers rotated strategically, 2 pairs of dress pants that still fit properly, and shoes comfortable enough for walking but professional enough to be taken seriously. The drive to town hall took 12 minutes through neighborhoods that told the story of Millfield's gradual decline. She passed the shuttered Woolworths that had closed when she was in high school, its windows now covered with plywood and graffiti. The old movie theater stood empty, its marquee displaying only random letters that spelled nothing in particular. But she also passed small signs of persistence: Carmen's Market with fresh flowers and window boxes, the Martinez family's auto shop where 3 generations worked side by side, the community garden where volunteers had transformed a vacant lot into rows of tomatoes and hope.
At town hall, Maya's office felt like a cave, windowless, cramped, filled with filing cabinets that held decades of municipal secrets. She'd inherited the space from Janet Morrison, along with a suspicious gap in the records from 2019 and a coffee mug that read, "World's okayest auditor." Maya had kept the mug, but filled it with pens instead of coffee. She preferred to stay alert through righteous indignation rather than caffeine. Her days followed a rhythm of discovery and documentation. Morning hours were spent reviewing contracts, cross-referencing invoices, and building spreadsheets that tracked money as it flowed from taxpayer pockets into private accounts. She'd developed a system: green highlighter for legitimate expenses, yellow for questionable charges, red for obvious fraud. Her desk looked like a rainbow of municipal malfeasance. Lunch breaks were often spent at Carmen's market, partly for the convenience, but mostly for the company. Carmen had become her unofficial advisor, a woman whose understanding of the town's politics had been earned through 20 years of selling groceries to everyone from city council members to struggling single mothers. "You look tired, mija," Carmen observed on a Wednesday afternoon, watching Maya push rice around her plate without eating. The market's back room served as an informal cafe, with 3 tables and chairs that didn't match but felt like home. "I'm fine," Maya replied automatically, then caught herself. "No, that's a lie. I'm exhausted and confused and probably in over my head." Carmen set down her own fork and leaned forward. "Tell me." Maya had learned to trust Carmen's listening, the way she gave her complete attention without rushing to offer solutions or platitudes. It was a skill Maya wished more people possessed, especially those who held elected office. "The more I dig, the worse it gets," Maya explained. "It's not just Hartwell Construction and Pinnacle Security. There's Westfield Consulting, which gets paid $50,000 a year to write reports that apparently don't exist. There's Metro Waste Management, which charges us for garbage pickup in neighborhoods that use a different company. There's Summit Technology
Solutions, which supposedly maintains our computer systems, but our computers are still running software from 2015. "How much?" Carmen asked. "Total? Probably close to $3 million over 7 years." Maya's voice was barely above a whisper. $3 million, Carmen. Do you know what we could do with $3 million? Carmen's eyes flashed with the anger of someone who'd watched her community struggle while others prospered from its decline. "We could fix the water main on Maple Street. We could hire back the librarians they laid off. We could fund the after-school programs my customers are always asking about." "We could do all of that and still have money left over," Maya agreed. "But instead, that money disappears into the pockets of people who already have more than they need." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Elizabeth Stern, the town's health officer and one of the few municipal employees Maya genuinely respected. Dr. Stern was in her 60s, with silver hair and the kind of steady competence that came from 30 years of public service. She'd worked through budget cuts, personnel reductions, and political changes, always maintaining her focus on the health and safety of Millfield's residents. "Maya, Carmen," Dr. Stern nodded as she approached their table. "Mind if I join you? I wanted to talk to Maya about something." They made room, and Dr. Stern sat with the careful posture of someone whose back had been bent by decades of carrying other people's problems. "I heard about your document requests," Dr. Stern said without preamble, "and I heard you're planning to run for council." Maya felt her cheeks flush. News traveled fast in a small town, but she'd hoped to keep her political intentions quiet until after she'd submitted her candidacy paperwork. "Word gets around," Dr. Stern continued, "especially when you start asking the right questions. I wanted you to know that some of us have been asking those same questions for years." "Some of us?" Maya asked. Dr. Stern glanced around the nearly empty cafe, then leaned closer. "There's a group of municipal employees, not many, but enough, who've been documenting the same irregularities you found. We've been careful, keeping records, building cases, but we're civil servants, Maya. We can't run for office while we're employed by the town. We can't speak publicly without risking our jobs." The weight of this revelation settled on Maya's shoulders like a heavy coat.
She wasn't alone in her discoveries, but she might be alone in her ability to act on them. "What are you saying?" Maya asked. "I'm saying that if you run, if you win, you'll have allies inside the system. People who can help you understand how things really work, who can guide you through the process of cleaning house." Dr. Stern's voice carried the authority of someone who'd seen enough political cycles to understand both the possibilities and the pitfalls. "But I'm also saying that the people benefiting from the current system won't give up without a fight." After Dr. Stern left, Maya and Carmen sat in contemplative silence. The afternoon sun slanted through the market's windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny spirits in the air. "Are you scared?" Carmen asked, finally. Maya considered the question seriously. Fear had been her constant companion for months. Fear of making mistakes, fear of consequences, fear of failure. But underneath the fear was something stronger and more persistent. "I'm terrified," Maya admitted, "but I'm more angry than scared, and I'm tired of being afraid." That evening, Maya drove to the cemetery where her grandmother was buried. Abuela Elena's grave was marked with a simple granite stone that bore her name, dates, and the inscription, "Beloved Mother and Grandmother." Maya had chosen the words herself, wishing she could have found a way to capture Elena's fierce spirit and unwavering principles in such limited space.
The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking Millfield's downtown, and from Elena's grave, Maya could see the entire scope of her grandmother's adopted hometown. The view included the shuttered businesses and potholed streets, but also the church where Elena had attended Mass for 47 years, the school where she'd volunteered as a reading tutor, the senior center where she'd organized birthday parties for residents who had no family. "Abuela," Maya said aloud, feeling foolish but needing to speak the words anyway. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. You always made everything look so easy. You fought for what was right without ever seeming to doubt yourself." A breeze stirred the plastic flowers on nearby graves, and Maya remembered her grandmother's voice. "Mija, strength isn't about not being afraid. Strength is about doing what's right even when you're terrified." Elena Rodriguez had come to Millfield in 1978 with 2 suitcases, 3 children, and an unshakable belief that hard work and honest dealing would be rewarded with opportunity. She'd worked as a seamstress, a house cleaner, and finally as a school custodian, always with dignity and always with an eye toward building something better for her family. Maya remembered being 12 years old, sitting at Elena's kitchen table while her grandmother balanced the family's bills on Friday evenings. Elena would count out cash for rent, utilities, groceries, and church tithing with the precision of a mathematician and the solemnity of a priest performing communion. "Every dollar has a job, mija," Elena would explain. "We tell our money where to go instead of wondering where it went." Those Friday evening lessons had shaped Maya's understanding of fiscal responsibility, but they'd also taught her something deeper, that money was power and power carried responsibility. People in positions of authority, whether parents managing household budgets or officials managing public funds, had an obligation to steward resources honestly and carefully. Standing in the cemetery as shadows lengthened across the hillside, Maya felt her grandmother's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. Elena had never run for office, had never made speeches or held press conferences, but she'd understood that democracy was built on the daily choices of ordinary people deciding to care about their community's welfare. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from David Chen. "Article goes to print tomorrow. You ready for this?" She typed back, "Ready or not, it's happening." The next morning's Millfield Gazette carried David's story across the front page. Local auditor uncovers pattern of municipal contract irregularities. The article was careful, well-sourced, and devastating. David had included Maya's documentation, expert analysis from an independent auditor, and responses from town officials, most of whom had declined to comment or provided explanations that raised more questions than they answered. Maya's phone started ringing at 7 a.m. and didn't stop until well past dinner time. Some calls were supportive, residents who'd suspected corruption but hadn't known how to prove it. Others were hostile, anonymous voices suggesting she mind her own business or face consequences. The most interesting call came from Margaret Westfield, president of the Millfield Chamber of Commerce and wife of the owner of Westfield Consulting, one of the companies Maya had identified as receiving payments for non-existent services. Ms. Rodriguez. Margaret's voice was polished steel wrapped in false concern. I understand you're planning to run for town council. How exciting for you. Thank you, Maya replied carefully. I hope you understand that politics can be very complicated for newcomers. There are so many nuances, so many relationships that have been built over decades. It would be unfortunate if someone got in over their head and made enemies unnecessarily.
The threat was delivered with the subtlety of a velvet hammer. But Maya had learned to recognize intimidation tactics from months of dealing with Tom Bradley and other municipal officials who preferred shadows to sunlight. Mrs. Westfield, Maya said, I'm not interested in making enemies. I'm interested in making sure taxpayer money is spent honestly and efficiently. If that creates enemies, so be it. There was a pause on the line. I see. Well, I hope you'll reconsider. Town council is a very demanding position. It requires someone with experience, someone who understands how to work within existing systems. It also requires someone who's willing to ask hard questions when those systems aren't working, Maya replied. Thank you for calling. That evening, Maya sat in her small kitchen reviewing her campaign strategy, if it could be called that. She had $200 in savings that she could dedicate to the effort, a growing list of community supporters, and David Chen's promise to cover her campaign fairly. Against her were decades of entrenched interests, well-funded opponents, and a political establishment that had grown comfortable with the status quo. Her laptop screen displayed the candidate filing form she'd completed 3 times, but not yet submitted. The deadline was 48 hours away, and with each passing minute, the decision felt more irreversible and more necessary. Maya thought about the conversation with Dr. Stern, about the cemetery visit with Elena's memory, about the phone calls from both supporters and detractors. She thought about the $2 million that had been stolen from her community, about the programs that had been cut in the services that had been reduced while private companies grew rich from public contracts. Most of all, she thought about the alternative, returning to her basement office, filing reports that no one would read, documenting crimes that no one would prosecute, watching her community continue its slow decline while she collected her modest paycheck and minded her own business. At 9:47 p.m., Maya Rodriguez clicked Submit on her candidate filing form for Millfield Town Council. The electronic confirmation appeared on her screen like a birth certificate for a new political life she wasn't sure she was ready to live. But, ready or not, she was officially a candidate, and tomorrow, the real work would begin. The Millfield Community Center had seen better decades. Built in 1962 as a symbol of post-war prosperity, it now bore the accumulated scars of deferred maintenance and budget cuts. The main meeting room's fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting dancing shadows across folding chairs arranged in hopeful rows. Maya arrived an hour early for her first campaign event, her hands shaking slightly as she arranged informational pamphlets she'd printed at FedEx with her own money. She'd chosen the community center deliberately. This was where her grandmother had attended citizenship classes in the 1980s, where Maya herself had learned to play basketball in middle school, where 3 generations of Millfield families had celebrated quinceañeras and retirement parties and political rallies. If she was going to challenge the establishment, she wanted to do it in a place that belonged to the people, not the politicians. Carmen arrived first, carrying a pot of coffee and a container of homemade cookies. For the crowd, she explained, though both women knew there was no guarantee anyone would show up. Political meetings in Millfield typically drew a dozen people on good nights, and Maya was an unknown quantity, a part-time auditor with big accusations and no political experience.
You nervous? Carmen asked, setting up the refreshment table with the efficiency of someone who'd organized countless community events. Beyond nervous, Maya admitted. I keep thinking about all the ways this could go wrong. What if nobody comes? What if too many people come? What if I say something stupid? What if they ask questions I can't answer?
Mija, Carmen said, her voice carrying the patience of a woman who'd watched many friends face their fears. You've been answering the hard questions for months. Tonight is just the first time you get to do it in public. At 7 o'clock, the room held exactly 11 people, a number that felt both disappointing and terrifying. Maya recognized most of the faces: Mrs. Patterson from downstairs, Dr. Stern, and 2 other municipal employees, David Chen with his notepad, Carmen and her husband Roberto, and 4 residents Maya knew by sight but not by name. Maya had prepared a 20-minute presentation with charts and graphs, but looking at the small gathering, she decided to abandon her formal approach. Instead, she sat on the edge of the table at the front of the room and began to speak from her heart. My name is Maya Rodriguez, she said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. Most of you know me as the woman who counts receipts in the town hall basement, but tonight I want you to know me as your neighbor, someone who's watched this town struggle while other people got rich from its problems. She gestured to a poster board displaying photographs of Millfield's deteriorating infrastructure, cracked sidewalks, broken streetlights, the pothole on Elm Street that had grown large enough to swallow a small car. Last month, I discovered that our town has been paying Hartwell Construction nearly $50,000 a year to maintain roads like these. I've documented their work, or rather, I've documented their lack of work. They've been collecting taxpayer money for services they haven't provided. Mrs. Patterson raised her hand tentatively. How much money are we talking about? Maya took a deep breath. Over the past 7 years, I've identified approximately $3 million in questionable contract payments. $3 million that could have fixed every pothole, hired back laid-off municipal workers, and funded community programs that were cut due to budget constraints. The number hung in the air like incense, heavy and transformative. Maya watched 11 faces process the implications. $3 million in a town where people fought over property tax increases of $50 per year. Dr. Stern leaned forward. Maya, what exactly are you proposing to do about this? I'm proposing to run for town council on a platform of transparency and accountability, Maya replied. I'm proposing to audit every municipal contract, eliminate phantom services, and redirect that money toward the community's actual needs. The questions came faster after that. How would she handle legal challenges from the contractors? What specific reforms would she propose? Did she have the political experience necessary to navigate municipal governance? Maya answered each question honestly, admitting when she didn't know something, but explaining how she would find out. She spoke about her vision for Millfield, a town where taxpayer money was spent efficiently, where municipal services actually served the community, where residents could trust their elected officials to act in their interests rather than their own. The meeting ended with Maya's phone number written on 11 pieces of paper and promises from her small audience to spread the word. It wasn't the political revolution she dreamed of, but it was a beginning. The real opposition began 3 days later. Maya's first indication that powerful people had taken notice of her candidacy came in the form of a phone call from Henry Morrison, Janet Morrison's husband, and a retired high school principal who commanded respect throughout Millfield. Henry's voice carried the weariness of a man who'd fought similar battles and lost. Maya, I need to talk to you. Can you meet me at the diner on Route 9? Away from Town Hall, away from ears that might be listening. The Route 9 diner was a relic from the 1950s, complete with red vinyl booths at a jukebox that played Patsy Cline for a quarter. Henry had chosen a corner booth away from the other customers, and his usually steady demeanor seemed shaken.
They know about Janet, he said without preamble once Maya had sat down. They know why she really left her job, and they know you're asking the same questions she asked. Maya felt her stomach tighten. Henry, what happened to Janet? The older man stared into his coffee cup as if it contained answers to questions he'd been afraid to ask. Janet found the same discrepancies you found. She started documenting everything, building a case, planning to present it to the town council. She thought she was being discreet. But she wasn't. Tom Bradley has friends throughout the municipal system. Janet's computer activity was monitored. Her phone calls were recorded. They knew every move she made before she made it. Henry's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. One night, someone broke into our house while we were sleeping. Nothing was stolen, but Janet's files were gone. Every document, every piece of evidence she'd collected, gone. Maya's hands were trembling now. Did you call the police? Henry's laugh was bitter. Maya, who do you think provides security services for the police station? Pinnacle Security Services, the same company that's been collecting payments for guards that don't exist. The implications crashed over Maya like cold water. The corruption wasn't just financial, it was systemic. It reached into law enforcement, municipal administration, and who knew where else? Why are you telling me this? Maya asked. Because Janet wants to help, Henry replied. She's been following your work through David Chen's articles. She has copies of her original research, copies she hid where they couldn't be found. She wants to support your campaign. Maya felt a surge of hope mixed with terror. An ally with Janet's experience and documentation could be invaluable, but it would also confirm that she was facing opponents willing to break laws to protect their interests. There's something else, Henry continued. Janet wasn't the first person to ask questions about municipal contracts. There was a man named Robert Valdez who served on the town council from 2015 to 2017. He started investigating the same patterns Janet found later. What happened to him? He lost his re-election bid after a campaign that destroyed his reputation. Suddenly, everyone in town knew about his divorce, his financial problems, his daughter's arrest for marijuana possession 5 years earlier. Personal information that had no bearing on his qualifications for office became the only thing people talked about. Maya understood the message. Character assassination was another weapon in their opponent's arsenal, and her own life would be scrutinized for anything that could be used against her. That afternoon, Maya drove to her sister Sophia's house in the suburbs of Hartford. She needed perspective, and Sophia had always been her anchor to life beyond Millfield's political drama. Sophia's house was a monument to successful escape. Manicured lawn, 2-car garage, children's bicycles arranged neatly on the front porch. Inside, the furniture was new and matching. The kitchen appliances were stainless steel, and the children's artwork was displayed in actual frames rather than taped to refrigerator doors. Maya! 8-year-old Isabella launched herself into her aunt's arms with the enthusiasm of someone who hadn't learned to worry about adult problems. 10-year-old Carlos was more reserved, offering a shy hug before disappearing back to his video game. Sophia emerged from the kitchen wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression shifting from welcome to concern as she took in Maya's appearance. "You look terrible. When's the last time you slept?" "I sleep. I sleep some, a few hours here and there." Sophia guided her to the living room, settling onto a couch that cost more than Maya's monthly rent. "Tell me what's really going on. And don't say everything's fine because I can see it's not."
Maya found herself pouring out the entire story. The contracts, the corruption, the campaign, the threats implied and explicit. Sophia listened without interruption, her face growing more troubled with each revelation. "Maya," Sophia said when the story ended, "you need to stop this. Come stay with us for a while. There are accounting jobs in Hartford. You could start over, build a normal life." "This is my normal life," Maya replied. "Millfield is my home."
Home is where your family is, Sophia countered. Home is where you're safe. Home is where you don't have to fight other people's battles. They'd had this conversation before, in different forms, but never with such high stakes. Sophia had always seen Millfield as a trap, a place that consumed people's dreams and gave back only struggle. She'd escaped to Hartford, built a career in corporate accounting, married a man who owned his own insurance agency, and created the kind of stable, comfortable life their parents had dreamed of for both daughters. Abuela Elena fought other people's battles, Maya said quietly. Abuela Elena cleaned other people's offices for 30 years and died with less than $5,000 in savings, Sophia replied, her voice sharp with old pain. Is that the life you want? The question hung between them like a bridge neither wanted to cross. Maya understood Sophia's perspective. Their grandmother had worked herself into an early grave for a community that had never fully appreciated her sacrifices. But Maya also remembered Elena's funeral, how the church had been packed with people whose lives she'd touched, how speaker after speaker had testified to her generosity and strength. I want the life where I can look at myself in the mirror, Maya said finally, where I know I tried to make things better instead of just making them easier. Sophia's expression softened, but her worry remained. Maya, these people you're fighting, they have money, connections, power. What do you have? Maya considered the question seriously. I have the truth. I have documentation. I have a growing number of supporters who are tired of being taken advantage of. That's not enough. Truth doesn't win elections. Money wins elections. And from what you're telling me, your opponents have a lot more money than you do. The conversation was interrupted by Isabella's return from the kitchen, carrying a plate of cookies and wearing an expression of determined curiosity. "Mommy, why is Tia Maya sad?" she asked, settling onto the couch between the two women. Sophia shot Maya a warning look, but Maya felt the need to be honest, even with an 8-year-old. "I'm not sad, sweetheart. I'm worried. There are some people in my town who are taking money that doesn't belong to them, and I'm trying to stop them." Isabella considered this with the seriousness of a child processing adult concepts. Like stealing? Yes, like stealing. Are you going to call the police? Maya and Sophia exchanged glances. It's complicated, Isabella. Sometimes the grown-ups who are supposed to stop stealing are friends with the people who are doing it. That's not fair, Isabella declared, with the absolute moral clarity of childhood. No, Maya agreed. It's not fair. That's why I'm trying to change things.
Isabella nodded as if this made perfect sense. Like when Carlos was being mean to kids at school and I told the teacher even though Carlos said it would make him mad at me? Exactly like that. Did it work? Maya smiled for the first time in days. Carlos stopped being mean, didn't he? Yeah, but he was mad at me for a while. Sometimes doing the right thing makes people mad, Maya explained. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. After dinner, Sophia walked Maya to her car, the evening air crisp with the promise of autumn. The suburban street was quiet except for the distant sound of children playing and the hum of air conditioning units. I can't talk you out of this, can I? Sophia asked. Would you want to, if our situations were reversed? Maya replied. Sophia was quiet for a long moment. No, she admitted finally. I'd probably be doing the same thing, but I'd be terrified every minute of it. I am terrified, but I'm more terrified of what happens if I don't try. They hugged goodbye, and Maya drove back to Millfield with Isabella's words echoing in her mind. Sometimes doing the right thing makes people mad, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. The next morning brought Maya's first real taste of organized opposition. She arrived at town hall to find Tom Bradley waiting in her office, sitting behind her desk with the casual arrogance of someone asserting territorial dominance. Maya, he said without getting up, we need to talk. We can talk, Maya replied, remaining standing, but you can talk from the visitor's chair.
Tom's smile was cold. I think you'll want to sit down for this conversation. He slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were copies of Maya's credit report, her rental history, her college transcripts, and what appeared to be surveillance photographs of her car parked at various locations around town. Interesting reading, Tom said. Did you know you applied for a credit card last year and were denied? Did you know your landlord has filed 2 complaints about late rent payments? Did you know you failed organic chemistry twice in college? Maya's hands trembled as she flipped through the documents. Every mistake, every moment of financial struggle, every academic setback was documented with bureaucratic precision. "How did you get this?" she asked. "Maya, you're running for public office. Your life is public record now. People have a right to know who they're voting for. This is private information. Some of it's protected by law." Tom's shrug was theatrical. Politics is a contact sport. If you can't handle having your background examined, maybe you're not cut out for public service. The threat was clear. Withdraw from the race, or watch your personal life become public entertainment. Maya thought about Janet Morrison's midnight break-in, about Robert Valdez's destroyed reputation, about all the ways powerful people protected their interests. "Tom," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "if you think my college grades or credit score are more important to voters than $3 million in stolen tax money, you're about to be very disappointed."
Tom's confident expression flickered. "Maya, you don't understand what you're up against. This isn't just about a few municipal contracts. This is about relationships that go back decades, families that have built their lives around these arrangements. You're not just threatening their income, you're threatening their entire way of life." "Good," Maya replied. "Maybe it's time for a different way of life." After Tom left, Maya sat alone in her office, staring at the folder of personal documents. The invasion of privacy was violation enough, but the implications were worse. If they had this information, what else did they have? What other weapons were they preparing to use against her? Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed Carmen's number. "Maya, you need to get over here right away," Carmen's voice was urgent. "There are men at my store asking questions about you." Maya drove to Carmen's market with her heart pounding. She found Carmen in the back office, her usual calm demeanor replaced by barely controlled anger. 3 men, Carmen explained, expensive suits, fancy car. They said they were journalists doing background research on local candidates. They wanted to know about your personal life, your family, your relationships. They offered to pay for information. "Did you tell them anything?" "I told them to get out of my store," Carmen replied fiercely. "But Maya, they weren't journalists. Journalists don't carry briefcases full of cash and ask leading questions about whether you have problems with alcohol or drugs." The systematic nature of the attack was becoming clear. Character assassination required ammunition, and Maya's opponents were gathering every possible piece of personal information that could be weaponized against her. "Carmen," Maya said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Are you prepared for what's coming? Because if you support my campaign, they're going to come after you too. Your business, your family, anything they can use as leverage." Carmen's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Mija, they've been coming after people like us for decades. The only difference is that now we're fighting back." That evening, Maya called a meeting of her growing campaign team, a group that now included Carmen, Dr. Stern, David Chen, Janet Morrison, and 5 other residents who'd volunteered to help. They gathered at the community center again, but this time the atmosphere was tense rather than hopeful. Maya shared the day's events: Tom Bradley's folder of personal information, the men questioning Carmen, the escalating pattern of intimidation. She watched her volunteers' faces as the reality of their situation became clear. "I need to be honest with all of you. This campaign is going to get ugly. They're going to investigate every person in this room. They're going to look for ways to hurt us professionally, personally, financially. If anyone wants to step back, now is the time." Dr. Stern spoke first. "I've been a public employee for 30 years.
I've seen good people driven out of public service by exactly these tactics. The only way it stops is if someone finally stands up and says enough. Janet Morrison nodded. They destroyed my career and drove me out of town. But they didn't destroy my documentation, and they didn't destroy my commitment to seeing justice done. David Chen adjusted his glasses nervously. My editor is getting pressure to stop covering your campaign. Anonymous complaints about my bias, threats to pull advertising from the paper. But this is the biggest story I've ever had the chance to cover. I'm not backing down.
One by one, each volunteer reaffirmed their commitment. They understood the risks, but they also understood the stakes. This wasn't just about municipal contracts anymore. It was about whether ordinary citizens could challenge entrenched corruption without being destroyed in the process. "All right then," Maya said, feeling a surge of determination that surprised her with its intensity. "If they want to fight, we'll give them one. But we're going to fight smart, and we're going to fight clean." She outlined her strategy: transparency as a weapon. Every attack on her character would be met with more documentation of corruption. Every personal assault would be redirected toward policy issues. Every attempt at intimidation would be publicly exposed. "They're counting on us being afraid," Maya explained. "They're counting on us backing down when things get difficult. But what they don't understand is that we're already living with the consequences of their corruption. Our schools are underfunded, our infrastructure is crumbling, our municipal services are being cut while they get rich. We don't have anything left to lose." The meeting ended with assignments. David would investigate the companies asking questions about Maya. Dr. Stern would document any attempts to pressure municipal employees. Carmen would coordinate community outreach, and Janet would provide historical context for the corruption patterns. As the volunteers filed out into the October night, Maya felt the weight of leadership settling on her shoulders. She'd started this journey as an auditor, seeking accountability. Now she was the leader of a grassroots movement challenging decades of systemic corruption. The next morning brought validation that their opponents were indeed escalating their efforts. Maya arrived at Town Hall to find a letter from the Millfield Personnel Committee informing her that her position was being restructured and that her employment would be terminated at the end of the month. The letter was signed by Tom Bradley and dated the day after Maya had refused to be intimidated by his folder of personal information. The message was clear: challenge the system, lose your livelihood. Maya stared at the termination letter, feeling the familiar surge of anger that had sustained her through months of discovery and documentation. They thought they could silence her by taking away her job. They thought economic pressure would force her to abandon her campaign and return to the comfortable anonymity of someone who minded her own business. They were wrong. Maya walked upstairs to the main office area, where municipal employees were beginning their daily routines. She approached the reception desk where Margaret Walsh, the town clerk, was sorting through morning mail. "Margaret," Maya said loud enough for everyone in the office to hear, "I just received my termination letter. I want you to know that I'll be appealing this decision through the proper channels, and I'll be documenting any evidence of retaliation against municipal employees who support government transparency." The office fell silent. Margaret's face went pale, and Tom Bradley emerged from his office with an expression of barely controlled rage. "Maya," Tom said, his voice carefully modulated for their audience, "your position is being eliminated due to budget constraints. This has nothing to do with your political activities." "Of course not," Maya replied with theatrical innocence. "Just like Janet Morrison's departure had nothing to do with her audit findings. Just like Robert Valdez's re-election loss had nothing to do with his investigation of municipal contracts." She looked around the office, making eye contact with each employee. "I want everyone here to know that if you support government transparency and accountability, you don't have to be afraid. There are laws protecting municipal employees from political retaliation, and there are lawyers willing to enforce those laws." Maya left Town Hall that morning as an unemployed political candidate, but she also left with something more valuable: the growing realization that their opponents' tactics were creating the very transparency and accountability they sought to prevent.
Every act of intimidation could be documented and publicized. Every attempt at retaliation could be exposed as evidence of corruption.
They thought they were silencing her. Instead, they were amplifying her message. The war for Millfield's future had officially begun. The Millfield Gazette's front page on Thursday morning carried a headline that split the town's consciousness like lightning. Municipal employee fired after exposing corruption. David Chen's article detailed Maya's termination, complete with timeline evidence suggesting retaliation and quotes from employment lawyers describing the illegality of such actions. But it was the sidebar story that truly shifted the political landscape. Former auditor provides additional evidence of municipal fraud. Janet Morrison had decided to go public with her research, providing David with copies of documents she'd hidden before her forced departure. The evidence painted a picture of corruption that went back 12 years and involved at least 8 different companies. Maya's phone began ringing at 6 in the morning and didn't stop until well past midnight. Some calls were from reporters, the Hartford Courant, Connecticut Public Radio, even a stringer for the New York Times who'd caught wind of the story. Others were from residents who'd been following the controversy and wanted to volunteer for her campaign. The most significant call came from attorney Lisa Chen, David's older sister and a partner at a Hartford law firm specializing in government accountability cases. Maya, Lisa's voice carried the crisp authority of someone accustomed to fighting institutional corruption. "I've been following your story through David's articles. I think you need legal representation, and I think this case needs to be elevated beyond local politics." They met that afternoon at Lisa's firm, a glass and steel monument to legal success that made Maya acutely aware of her thrift store blazer and scuffed shoes. But Lisa's manner was warm and professional, treating Maya like a potential client rather than a charity case. "Let me be clear about what we're dealing with," Lisa began, spreading documents across a conference table that could have seated 20 people. "Based on the evidence you and Janet Morrison have provided, we're looking at multiple felonies: conspiracy to defraud the government, wire fraud, money laundering, and probably RICO violations if we can prove ongoing criminal enterprise." Maya felt dizzy. RICO? Like organized crime? RICO applies to any ongoing criminal organization, including corrupt municipal governments, Lisa explained. "The pattern of behavior you've documented, systematic theft of public funds over multiple years involving multiple defendants, fits the definition perfectly." Lisa pulled out a legal pad and began sketching what looked like an organizational chart. "Help me understand the relationships. Who are the key players and how are they connected?" Maya spent the next 2 hours walking Lisa through the web of corruption she'd uncovered. Mayor Frank Castellanos, who'd held office for 16 years, and whose construction company had somehow avoided all municipal contracts, while his brother-in-law's company, Hartwell Construction, received hundreds of thousands in no-bid agreements. Tom Bradley, the procurement officer whose wife worked for Westfield Consulting. City council members whose family businesses provided services to the town at above market rates. "It's a closed loop," Maya explained. "They award contracts to each other's companies, approve each other's budgets, and protect each other from investigation. The only people who lose are the taxpayers who fund it all." Lisa's expression grew more grim as the scope of the corruption became clear. "Maya, this isn't just municipal corruption. This is a criminal conspiracy that's been operating for over a decade. The dollar amounts we're talking about, $3 million plus, put this in federal jurisdiction." "What does that mean?" "It means we contact the FBI."
The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Maya had started as an auditor seeking accountability. Now she was contemplating federal criminal charges against half of Millfield's political establishment. "Lisa," Maya said carefully, "what are the chances that some of these people go to prison?" "If we can prove what I think we can prove? Very high. Federal prosecutors don't lose cases like this.
especially when the evidence is as comprehensive as what you've gathered. That evening, Maya called an emergency meeting of her campaign team. The community center's meeting room felt different now, less like a place for political organizing and more like a war room where momentous decisions were made. The FBI? Carmen's voice carried a mixture of excitement and terror. Maya, that changes everything. Dr. Stern nodded slowly. It also makes everything more dangerous. These people have been stealing millions of dollars. They're not going to surrender quietly when they realize they might be facing federal prison time. David Chen was typing furiously on his laptop. This is incredible. A federal investigation of municipal corruption in Millfield? This story goes national. Janet Morrison had been quiet through most of the discussion, but now she leaned forward with the intensity of someone who'd been waiting years for this moment. I want to be there when you meet with the FBI. I want to look federal agents in the eye and tell them exactly how these people destroyed my career to protect their criminal enterprise. Maya felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. Filing a complaint with the FBI would be irreversible. It would transform her political campaign from a local race into a federal case. It would make powerful enemies who'd already demonstrated their willingness to retaliate against threats. It would also be the right thing to do. All right, Maya said. We contact the FBI, but we do this smart. Lisa handles all federal communications. We continue the campaign as if nothing has changed. And we document everything. Every conversation, every threat, every attempt at intimidation. The FBI field office in New Haven occupied a fortress-like building designed to project federal authority. Maya, accompanied by Lisa Chen and Janet Morrison, passed through multiple security checkpoints before being escorted to a conference room where Special Agent Robert Torres waited with 2 other agents and a prosecutor from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Agent Torres was in his 40s, with the steady demeanor of someone who'd investigated enough corruption cases to recognize the real thing when he saw it. He listened without interruption as Maya and Janet presented their evidence, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting the documents speak for themselves. Ms. Rodriguez, Agent Torres said when the presentation ended, this is impressive work. Thorough documentation, clear patterns of fraud, credible witnesses. But I need to ask, why didn't you contact federal authorities sooner? Maya exchanged glances with Lisa. Agent Torres, I was a part-time municipal auditor. I thought this was a local issue that should be handled through local channels. It wasn't until they fired me for asking questions that I realized how deep the corruption went. And now you're running for town council? Yes. Agent Torres smiled for the first time. That's either very brave or very foolish. Probably both. The prosecutor, a woman in her 30s named Amanda Walsh, had been reviewing the financial documents with the focused intensity of someone calculating federal sentencing guidelines.
We'll need additional evidence, Walsh said. Bank records, communications between the defendants, documentation of the decision-making process for contract awards. What you've provided is enough to open an investigation, but not enough to guarantee prosecutions. Agent Torres nodded. Which brings us to the question of cooperation. Ms. Rodriguez, would you be willing to wear a recording device to document conversations with the subjects of our investigation? Maya felt her stomach drop. You want me to spy on them? We want you to continue being yourself, Agent Torres replied. You're already asking questions, already investigating their activities. The only difference would be that we'd have recordings of their responses. Lisa leaned forward. Agent Torres, my client is running for political office. If it becomes known that she's cooperating with a federal investigation, it could destroy her candidacy and potentially put her in physical danger. We understand the risks, Torres replied, but we also understand that without inside cooperation, white-collar criminals rarely face consequences for their actions. Ms. Rodriguez has an opportunity to ensure that justice is served.
Maya thought about her grandmother's weathered hands, about her mother's midnight shifts, about all the people in Millfield who'd been unknowingly funding corruption while their community struggled. She thought about the water main on Maple Street that had been broken for 8 months, while Hartwell Construction collected payments for roadwork they'd never performed. "I'll do it," she said. The next week transformed Maya's campaign from a grassroots political effort into an undercover federal operation. Agent Torres provided her with recording equipment disguised as a button on her blazer, and she began systematically documenting conversations with municipal officials. The recordings were revelatory. Tom Bradley, believing he was speaking to a defeated political opponent, openly discussed the arrangements that kept certain companies profitable and certain officials cooperative. Mayor Castellanos, reached by phone, made veiled threats about what happened to people who didn't understand how things work in Millfield. But the most damaging recording came from an unexpected source: Margaret Westfield, president of the Chamber of Commerce and wife of Westfield Consulting's owner. She invited Maya to lunch at the country club, ostensibly to discuss finding common ground between Maya's reform agenda and the business community's interests. "Maya," Margaret said, over Caesar salads that cost more than Maya's weekly grocery budget, "you're obviously an intelligent woman. You understand that business relationships are built on trust and mutual benefit. I understand that taxpayers deserve honest value for their money," Maya replied, grateful that the recording device was capturing Margaret's condescending tone. Of course. But you also understand that sometimes arrangements serve everyone's interests. The contracts you're questioning, yes, perhaps they're not always perfectly documented, but they maintain relationships, they provide stability, they ensure that important work gets done without the delays and complications of competitive bidding." Maya leaned forward, sensing an opportunity. "Margaret, are you suggesting that municipal contracts are awarded based on relationships rather than merit?" Margaret's laugh was crystal clear on the recording. "Maya, darling, merit is subjective. Frank Castellanos has been mayor for 16 years because he understands that governing is about managing relationships, not following rule books. The companies you're investigating have been partners with this town for decades. They know our needs, they understand our systems, they can be trusted to handle sensitive municipal business, even when they don't actually provide the services they're contracted for." Margaret's expression shifted slightly. "Maya, I think you're misunderstanding the nature of municipal consulting. Sometimes the most valuable service is simply being available when
needed. Hartwell Construction may not repave every street every year, but they're there when emergencies arise. Pinnacle Security may not post guards at every location, but they provide the deterrent effect of knowing security is available." Maya felt a surge of anger at the casual rationalization of theft. So, taxpayers are paying for potential services rather than actual services? "Taxpayers are paying for peace of mind," Margaret replied smoothly. "They're paying for the security of knowing that when problems arise, solutions are already in place." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Margaret becoming increasingly explicit about how the system actually worked. Contracts were awarded based on loyalty rather than competitive bidding. Municipal employees who asked too many questions were transferred or terminated. Residents who complained about services were ignored or intimidated. By the end of lunch, Maya had recorded enough admissions to support federal conspiracy charges against most of Millfield's political establishment. That afternoon, she delivered the recording to Agent Torres, who listened with the satisfied expression of a prosecutor hearing a confession. "Ms. Rodriguez," Torres said when the recording ended, "you've just documented criminal conspiracy in real time. Mrs. Westfield has essentially admitted to participating in a scheme to defraud the federal government, because these municipal contracts are funded partly with federal block grants." Maya felt a strange mixture of triumph and sadness. She'd set out to expose corruption, but the reality of seeing people she'd known for years reveal themselves as criminals was more painful than she had anticipated.
"What happens now?" she asked. "Now we move to the enforcement phase. We'll execute search warrants, freeze assets, and begin making arrests. But Maya, I need you to understand something. Once this becomes public, there's no going back. These people are going to know you were the source of our information." Maya thought about the conversation with Margaret Westfield, about the casual arrogance with which the woman had described stealing taxpayer money. She thought about the broken water mains and cut services and laid-off municipal workers. "Agent Torres, I stopped worrying about going back the day I decided to run for office. Sometimes you have to burn bridges to build something better." The federal raids began at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks before the election. Maya watched from her apartment window as FBI agents served search warrants at Tom Bradley's house, Mayor Castellanos' office, and the headquarters of 6 different companies that had received questionable municipal contracts. By noon, the story was breaking on every major news outlet in Connecticut. Federal raids target municipal corruption in Millfield. FBI investigates small-town political conspiracy. Whistleblower candidate exposes years of government fraud. Maya's phone rang constantly with interview requests, but she followed Lisa Chen's advice and referred all media inquiries to the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office. Her role now was to continue campaigning while federal prosecutors built their cases. The political impact was immediate and dramatic. Mayor Castellanos announced his resignation that afternoon. Tom Bradley was placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. 3 sitting council members withdrew from their re-election campaigns. But Maya's opponents weren't surrendering quietly. That evening, someone threw a brick through Carmen's store window with a note attached. "Mind your own business, or this gets worse."
Dr. Stern received an anonymous phone call threatening her pension if she continued supporting Maya's campaign. David Chen's editor was contacted by mysterious advertising clients who threatened to pull their business if the newspaper continued its biased coverage of municipal politics. The message was clear. Federal investigation or not, Millfield's old guard was prepared to fight for survival. Maya called another emergency meeting of her campaign team, this time at Lisa Chen's law office, where they could be confident their conversations weren't being monitored. "They're scared," Lisa observed. "When people face federal charges, they get desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things." Carmen's hands were shaking as she held a photo of the damage to her store. "Maya, maybe I should step back from the campaign. I can't afford to lose my business." "Carmen, I understand." "No," Carmen interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "I said maybe I should step back. I didn't say I was going to. My grandmother opened that store in 1963. She faced discrimination, vandalism, boycotts, people who didn't want a Mexican family in their neighborhood. She never backed down, and neither will I." Dr. Stern nodded firmly. "I've been a public servant for 30 years. I've seen what happens when good people do nothing while corruption spreads. Someone has to stand up." David Chen adjusted his glasses nervously. "My editor's getting pressure, but she's standing behind our coverage. She says this is the most important story the Gazette has ever broken." Janet Morrison had been quiet through most of the meeting, but now she spoke with the conviction of someone who'd waited years for vindication. "They destroyed my career to protect their crimes. Now they're facing federal prosecution because Maya had the courage to finish what I started. I'm not backing down. We're too close to victory." Maya felt a surge of emotion as she looked around the room at these people who'd risked their livelihoods to support her campaign. A small business owner, a municipal employee, a young journalist, a wronged civil servant, ordinary people who decided that extraordinary times required extraordinary courage. "All right," Maya said, "we finish this. 3 weeks until the election. The FBI has their evidence, the prosecutors have their cases, and we have our message. It's time to let the voters decide whether they want more of the same or something completely different." As the meeting ended and her team headed into the October night, Maya felt the weight of history settling around her shoulders. In 3 weeks, Millfield voters would choose between the corruption they knew and the change they'd never dared to imagine. The real test was about to begin. Maya Rodriguez never intended to become a political revolutionary. As a part-time municipal auditor in Millfield, Connecticut, she spent her days in a basement office methodically reviewing invoices and receipts for a small town that most people had never heard of. It was quiet work that suited her methodical nature, the kind of attention to detail she'd learned from her grandmother Elena, who had immigrated from Mexico with nothing but determination and a belief that honest work deserved honest pay. But on a gray October morning in 2014, Maya discovered something that would transform not just her life, but the entire future of American municipal governance. Buried in a stack of routine paperwork was an invoice from Hartwell Construction for $47,000 worth of road repairs on Maple Street. Maya knew Maple Street well. She drove down it every day on her way to work. The street was in terrible condition, full of potholes and cracked pavement that the city had been promising to fix for years. The invoice claimed the work had been completed 6 months earlier, but Maya's trained eye caught something suspicious. The documentation was incomplete, the photographs looked generic, and, most tellingly, Maple Street still looked exactly as terrible as it had for the past decade. What started as a routine audit quickly became something much more significant. Maya spent weeks meticulously documenting her findings, cross-referencing invoices with actual work
completed, and building an evidence file that would eventually expose the largest municipal corruption scandal in Connecticut's history. The fraudulent Hartwell Construction invoice wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a systematic scheme involving Mayor Frank Castellanos, Public Works Director Tom Bradley, and several local contractors who had been stealing taxpayer money for years. They had created fake invoices for work never performed, inflated costs for legitimate projects, and funneled hundreds of thousands of dollars into their own pockets, while Millfield's infrastructure crumbled and essential services were cut. When Maya first presented her findings to town officials, the response was swift and predictable: denial, deflection, and personal attacks. Mayor Castellanos accused her of misunderstanding complex municipal accounting procedures. Tom Bradley suggested she was overstepping her authority as a part-time employee. Other officials questioned her competence and motivations. But Maya had learned something important from her grandmother Elena. When you know something is wrong, staying silent makes you complicit in the wrongdoing. Elena had faced discrimination and hardship throughout her life, but she had never compromised her principles for the sake of convenience or safety. Armed with meticulously documented evidence and an unshakable belief in the importance of honest government, Maya refused to back down. She expanded her investigation, working evenings and weekends to trace the full scope of the corruption. She discovered that the fraud extended far beyond road construction, to include inflated consulting contracts, phantom snow removal services, and kickback schemes involving multiple city departments. The more Maya uncovered, the more dangerous her position became. Her supervisor, Margaret Westfield, began making her working conditions increasingly difficult. Maya's hours were cut, her access to certain records was restricted, and she faced constant pressure to abandon her investigation and return to routine auditing work. But Maya had allies she didn't know existed. Janet Morrison, a longtime municipal employee, had been documenting suspicious activities for years, but hadn't known how to proceed. Dr. Elizabeth Stern, the town's health commissioner, had long suspected corruption, but lacked the accounting expertise to prove it. David Chen, a young reporter for the local Millfield Gazette, had been looking for exactly the kind of documented evidence Maya had assembled. The transformation from government employee to reform activist wasn't easy. Maya faced professional retaliation, personal attacks, and constant pressure to abandon her investigation. Her superiors made it clear that her career prospects would be much better if she focused on routine auditing work rather than exposing uncomfortable truths about municipal operations. But Maya had reached a point where retreat was impossible. She had seen too much evidence of systemic corruption to pretend it didn't exist. More importantly, She had begun to understand that the stolen money represented more than financial fraud. It represented stolen democracy. When public officials serve private interests instead of the public good, they steal citizens' voice in their own governance. Working with David Chen and other allies, Maya began building a case that would ultimately involve federal prosecutors. The evidence she had assembled showed clear patterns of fraud, conspiracy, and abuse of public trust that violated both state and federal laws. But Maya knew that legal prosecution, while important, wouldn't be sufficient to create lasting change. Real reform would require political change. It would require electing officials committed to transparency and accountability. It would require citizens who understood their power to demand honest government. And it would require someone willing to step forward as a candidate for public office. When Maya announced her candidacy for town council in early 2019, the reaction was exactly what the title suggests: laughter. Established political figures dismissed her as a disgruntled employee seeking revenge. Party officials questioned whether a part-time auditor had the experience necessary for elected office. Other supporters worried that she was taking on more than she could handle. But Maya's campaign was built on something more powerful than political experience or party endorsements: documented evidence of corruption and a clear vision for reform. She had spent years studying how municipal government actually worked, not how it was supposed to work.
She understood the budget process, the contracting procedures, and the regulatory frameworks that were supposed to prevent exactly the kind of corruption she had discovered. Maya's platform was straightforward: implement transparent budgeting processes, require competitive bidding for all municipal contracts, establish citizen oversight committees, and create systems that would make future corruption much more difficult to hide. These weren't radical proposals. They were basic good government principles that had been abandoned in favor of the insider dealing that had characterized Millfield politics for decades. The campaign itself became a grassroots education effort. Maya organized town halls where she presented her evidence to residents who had never understood why their taxes kept rising while services deteriorated. She created detailed budget analyses that showed exactly how much money had been stolen and how those funds could have been used to address community needs. What made Maya's campaign different from typical political efforts was its foundation in documented evidence rather than promises or ideology. Every claim she made about corruption was supported by invoices, photographs, financial records, and other documentation that citizens could examine for themselves. This approach had several important effects. First, it made her accusations impossible to dismiss as partisan attacks or personal grievances. The evidence spoke for itself, and even Maya's opponents couldn't credibly deny that taxpayer money had been stolen. Second, it educated voters about how municipal government actually functioned, giving them tools to evaluate not just Maya's candidacy, but future political decisions. Most importantly, Maya's evidence-based approach demonstrated that ordinary citizens could understand complex governance issues when information was presented clearly and completely. Her campaign materials included detailed budget analyses, infrastructure assessment reports, and policy proposals that treated voters as intelligent adults capable of making informed decisions about their community's future. The campaign attracted support from unexpected sources. Carmen Martinez, whose small market had been damaged during a suspicious accident that Maya's investigation had connected to intimidation efforts, became a key volunteer and fundraiser. Dr. Stern provided crucial credibility as a respected professional who had witnessed the corruption from inside government. Even some municipal employees who couldn't publicly support Maya found ways to provide information and assistance. Maya's election victory in November 2019 was decisive: 2,847 votes to her closest opponent's 1,923. But her victory was just part of a broader transformation. The two other reform candidates she had endorsed also won council seats, giving them a working majority committed to transparency and accountability. a ballot measure requiring competitive bidding for municipal contracts, passed with 73% support. The election results sent a clear message. When citizens have access to accurate information about government performance, they choose accountability over corruption. Maya's victory proved that evidence-based campaigns could overcome entrenched political interests and that ordinary citizens were hungry for honest governance. But winning the election was just the beginning of the real work. Maya and her allies faced the challenge of transforming campaign promises into effective policy while navigating a municipal bureaucracy that had been designed to facilitate the very corruption they were trying to eliminate. Maya's first priority was implementing the transparency measures that had been central to her campaign. This meant creating online databases where citizens could track municipal expenditures in real time, establishing public review processes for all major contracts, and implementing oversight mechanisms that would make future corruption much more difficult to hide. These changes weren't just procedural, they were cultural. For decades, Millfield's government had operated on the assumption that citizens didn't need to understand complex municipal operations. Maya's reforms were based on the opposite assumption, that democracy worked best when citizens had access to complete, accurate information about how their government operated. The results were dramatic and immediate. Within 6 months, Maya's council had terminated the fraudulent contracts, implemented competitive bidding for all municipal services, and redirected
nearly $300,000 annually toward community priorities that had been neglected for years. The water main on Maple Street was finally repaired. The library restored its evening hours. The community center expanded its after-school programming. But the most significant changes weren't measured in dollars or infrastructure improvements. They were measured in citizen engagement. Town council meetings that had once drawn a dozen apathetic residents now regularly attracted 50 or more engaged citizens. Municipal budgets became topics of community discussion rather than documents hidden in bureaucratic language. Maya's success in Millfield attracted attention from reform advocates across the country. Communities dealing with similar corruption problems reached out for advice on investigation techniques, campaign strategies, and governance reforms. Municipal auditors, citizen activists, and reform candidates began using Maya's methods to expose corruption and implement accountability measures in their own communities. Recognizing the potential for broader impact, Maya established the Elena Rodriguez Institute for Democratic Accountability, named for her grandmother, whose values had inspired her commitment to public service. The institute provided training, technical assistance, and ongoing support to communities seeking to replicate Millfield's transformation. The institute's program was intensive. 6 weeks of training in forensic accounting, investigative journalism, political organizing, and public administration, followed by 6 months of ongoing mentorship as participants returned to their communities to implement reform initiatives. Maya had designed the curriculum based on her own experience, teaching the skills she'd learned through trial and error during her transformation from part-time auditor to reform leader. Maya's work eventually attracted attention from federal officials interested in supporting municipal reform efforts nationwide. She was offered a position as Deputy Assistant Attorney General for Public Integrity, overseeing federal prosecutions of government corruption cases across the entire country. While the federal position represented tremendous professional recognition, Maya chose to remain in Millfield while expanding her impact through the Institute and related organizations. She understood that lasting reform required sustained local engagement rather than top-down federal intervention. Over the following years, Maya served simultaneously as Millfield's mayor and as director of increasingly sophisticated reform organizations that provided support to communities worldwide. The Millfield model became a recognized approach to municipal reform, adapted for different cultures and political systems, but maintaining core principles of transparency, accountability, and citizen engagement.
25 years after Maya first discovered those fraudulent invoices, the transformation of Millfield had become a case study in effective democratic reform. The town regularly hosted delegations from around the world, seeking to understand how a small Connecticut community had become a global model for honest governance. But Maya's greatest pride wasn't in the international recognition or academic awards. It was in the knowledge that Millfield's children grew up expecting honest government as a normal part of civic life. 3 generations of residents had learned to see themselves as active participants in democracy rather than passive recipients of government services. The statistical measures were impressive. The Elena Rodriguez Institute had trained over 1,200 municipal reform advocates, supported successful anti-corruption campaigns in 87 communities, and helped recover an estimated $45 million in misspent taxpayer funds. But the real impact couldn't be measured in numbers. The real impact was in the culture change. Communities that had learned to expect transparency from their governments, citizens who understood their power to hold elected officials accountable, and a generation of young people who'd grown up believing that honest governance was possible. Maya Rodriguez's story demonstrates that democratic reform isn't created by extraordinary people doing impossible things. It's created by ordinary people deciding that the status quo is unacceptable and committing themselves to the patient, difficult work of building something better.
Her career began with a simple question. Why was taxpayer money disappearing while community needs went unmet? That question grew into a 40-year commitment to proving that ordinary citizens could create extraordinary change when they chose courage over comfort, engagement over apathy, and service over self-interest. The reforms Maya implemented in Millfield have been replicated in hundreds of communities worldwide. The investigative techniques she developed have been taught to thousands of municipal employees, journalists, and citizen activists. The governance principles she championed have influenced policy at every level of American government. But perhaps most importantly, Maya's example has inspired countless individuals to ask their own uncomfortable questions about how their governments operate. She proved that one person really can change the world, not through dramatic gestures or political theater, but through the methodical, persistent work of exposing truth and demanding accountability. Maya Rodriguez's story offers several crucial lessons for citizens concerned about government accountability in their own communities. Documentation is powerful. Maya's investigation succeeded because she meticulously documented every piece of evidence. Corruption thrives in darkness, so shining light on it through careful record-keeping can be more effective than any political rhetoric. Evidence beats emotion. Maya's campaign was built on facts rather than promises. When citizens have access to documented evidence of government performance, they make better decisions about their political choices. Ordinary citizens have extraordinary power. Maya began as a part-time municipal employee with no political experience. Her transformation into a national reform leader demonstrates that change is possible when people choose engagement over apathy. Reform requires persistence. Maya's investigation took years to complete, and implementing lasting change took even longer. Democratic reform isn't achieved through single elections or individual heroic acts. It requires sustained commitment from engaged citizens. Local politics matter. Maya's work began at the most local level of government, but its impact eventually reached the national stage. Citizens who want to create change should start by paying attention to the government decisions that most directly affect their daily lives. Today, 50 years after Maya Rodriguez first discovered those fraudulent invoices, Millfield continues to serve as proof that democracy works when citizens make it work. The town's government operates with transparency and accountability that would have been unimaginable during the corruption years. Citizens regularly participate in budget discussions, policy debates, and oversight activities that ensure their voices are heard in their own governance. Maya's bronze statue stands in Rodriguez Democracy Plaza, holding the fraudulent invoice that started everything. The inscription reads,
She asked the right questions at the right time and proved that democracy works when citizens make it work. But Maya's real monument isn't made of bronze. It's made of the daily choices that citizens make to stay informed, ask questions, and hold their government accountable. It's found in every town hall meeting where residents demand transparent answers to difficult questions. It's present in every election where voters choose candidates based on documented evidence rather than empty promises. The story of Maya Rodriguez proves that they can laugh when you say you'll run for office, but they stop laughing when democracy works the way it's supposed to work.
This remarkable true story of municipal reform demonstrates that democracy isn't a spectator sport. It requires active participation from informed citizens who are willing to ask hard questions and demand honest answers. Maya Rodriguez's journey from part-time auditor to internationally recognized reform leader offers practical lessons for anyone concerned about government accountability in their own community. Her methods for investigating corruption, building evidence-based campaigns, and implementing lasting reform have been successfully adopted by hundreds of communities worldwide. Subscribe to our newsletter to receive regular updates on democratic reform movements, citizen engagement strategies, and the ongoing work of communities that are proving every day that honest government is possible when citizens choose courage over comfort. Join the movement. Democracy works when citizens make it work, and every community deserves the kind of transparent, accountable governance that Maya Rodriguez helped create in Millfield. Subscribe today and discover how you can help write the next chapter of this continuing story of democratic renewal. Because the work of democracy never ends. It just finds new champions in every generation who understand that ordinary people have the power to create extraordinary change.